The beige walls of Sunset Manor reminded me of oatmeal, bland, uninspiring, and something you'd rather not face first thing in the morning. I pressed my palm against the cool window glass, watching the parking lot where my son David's silver Mercedes had disappeared 3 hours ago. The taillights had faded into the October drizzle, taking with them 37 years of what I'd foolishly believed was unconditional love. "You're a burden, Mom." His words echoed in the sterile hallway of my new reality. "I can't keep pretending this arrangement works. You need professional care." Professional care? That's what he called abandoning his 72-year-old mother in a place that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. The same woman who'd worked double shifts at the diner to pay for his college tuition, who'd sat through countless Little League games cheering his name, who'd mortgaged her house to help him start his law practice. My roommate, Agnes, shuffled past my bed, dragging her oxygen tank like a reluctant pet. She'd been here 4 years, she'd told me earlier, ever since her daughter decided that caring for a woman with emphysema was too stressful for her busy lifestyle. Agnes had the look of someone who'd stopped expecting visitors, eyes that had learned not to brighten when footsteps approached our door. "First week's always the hardest," she wheezed, settling into her chair with practiced resignation. "You'll get used to the routine. Breakfast at 7, meds at 8, activities at 10. They've got bingo on Tuesdays." Bingo? I'd gone from managing the household finances and tending my prize-winning rose garden to the thrilling prospect of Tuesday night bingo. The irony wasn't lost on me that David had power of attorney over my affairs, the same David who couldn't balance his own checkbook until he was 25. The nursing home paperwork sat on my bedside table, David's signature bold and decisive across the bottom. He'd handled everything with the cold efficiency of a man closing a business deal. Room assignment, meal preferences, emergency contacts, all decided without consulting the woman whose life he was reorganizing. But David had made one crucial oversight in his haste to rid himself of his inconvenient mother. He'd forgotten about the will. My attorney, Harold Brennan, had been my neighbor for 15 years before I'd moved in with David. Harold was the kind of man who remembered birthdays and noticed when someone's newspapers piled up uncollected. More importantly, he was the kind of lawyer who made house calls to nursing homes when old friends needed legal advice. "Eleanor," Harold had said during his visit yesterday, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years practicing family law, "you have options, more options than your son realizes." The manila envelope Harold had left contained documents that would change everything. Inside were revised estate papers, bank account transfers, and a few other legal instruments that would teach David the true meaning of consequences. $3 million in assets, accumulated through decades of careful saving and smart investments, suddenly hung in the balance. David thought he'd cornered me, trapped me in this sterile prison while he waited for his inheritance. He'd calculated the monthly nursing home fees, probably figured out how long my savings would last, maybe even started planning how to spend his windfall. But David had always been better at making assumptions than asking questions. The afternoon recreational therapy session was ending in the common room. I watched residents shuffle back to their rooms, some assisted by staff members who spoke in the patronizing sing-song voice reserved for children and the elderly. This was my world now. Scheduled activities, monitored medications, and the constant reminder that I was no longer considered capable of making my own decisions. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Hope you're settling in well. I'll visit when my schedule allows." When his schedule allows. The man couldn't even pretend to care about my adjustment to this place. No questions about my roommate, the food, or whether I felt comfortable. Just a perfunctory message to ease his conscience. I typed back, "Settling in fine. Had an interesting visit from Harold today. We discussed my estate planning. The response came faster than I'd expected. "What do you mean estate planning? Everything's already handled." "Is it?" I replied, then turned off my phone. The seed was planted. David's legal mind would be working overtime tonight, trying to figure out what his mother might be planning. He'd probably call Harold first thing tomorrow morning, demanding to know what we'd discussed. But Harold, bound by attorney-client privilege, would reveal nothing without my permission. Agnes looked up from her puzzle book, studying my face with the sharp intelligence that age and illness hadn't dimmed. "You've got that look," she said, her voice carrying a note of approval. "The look of someone who's not going down without a fight." "I raised a successful attorney," I said, smoothing the legal documents in my lap. "I suppose it's time I learned a few things about leverage myself." The dinner bell chimed, announcing the evening meal. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes, according to the menu posted by the nurse's station. Institutional food served on institutional plates in an institutional dining room. But as I made my way down the hallway, I felt lighter than I had in months. David thought he'd won. He'd removed the burden of his aging mother from his perfectly curated life, securing his financial future while maintaining the facade of doing what was best for me. But he'd forgotten the most important lesson I'd tried to teach him growing up. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences arrive when you least expect them. The next phase of my plan would require patience, careful timing, and the kind of strategic thinking that came from 72 years of navigating life's challenges. David was about to learn that his mother was far from the helpless old woman he dismissed. Some burdens, as he was about to discover, had teeth. The silence from David's end lasted exactly 18 hours. I'd been counting. Harold's secretary called first thing Wednesday morning to inform me that David had phoned their office 4 times, demanding an immediate meeting. Each call had grown progressively more agitated, she'd said with barely concealed amusement. The final call included threats about undue influence and exploitation of vulnerable seniors. "Mr. Brennan will see your son at 2 o'clock today," she'd told me. "He wanted me to ask if you'd like to participate by speakerphone." "Tell Harold I'll be there in person," I'd replied, already planning my temporary exit from Sunset Manor. The beauty of being in a nursing home voluntarily, rather than under court order, was that I could leave whenever I chose. David had been so eager to dump me here that he'd never bothered with the legal paperwork that would have made me a prisoner. Another oversight that would cost him dearly. I spent the morning getting ready with the kind of care I hadn't bothered with since arriving. My navy blue suit still fit perfectly, and the pearl necklace David's father had given me for our 25th anniversary caught Delight just right. If I was going to ruin my son's day, I intended to look respectable doing it. Agnes helped me with my hair, her arthritic fingers surprisingly gentle as she pinned it into the elegant chignon I'd worn to every important occasion for the past 40 years. "You clean up nice for someone who's supposedly losing her marbles," she said, stepping back to admire her work. The taxi ride to Harold's office gave me time to review my strategy. David would enter that conference room expecting to find his confused, manipulated mother being taken advantage of by an opportunistic attorney. Instead, he'd discover a woman who'd spent the last 3 days researching elder law, asset protection, and the fine art of disinheritance. Harold's office occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian mansion downtown. The same office where I'd signed my first will 23 years ago, back when David was fresh out of law school, and I still believed he'd inherited his father's sense of honor along with his sharp mind. Eleanor rose from behind his mahogany desk, his silver hair perfectly groomed, despite the early hour. "You look magnificent. Ready for this?" "I've been ready for this conversation for months," I replied, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "I just didn't realize it until David made his priorities crystal clear." At precisely 2 o'clock, David arrived. I heard his voice in the reception area, that familiar tone he used when he wanted to intimidate someone into compliance. The same voice he'd used when telling me I was too much trouble to keep living in his house. He entered the conference room like a man preparing for battle, his expensive suit armor against whatever he expected to face. His confident stride faltered when he saw me sitting calmly at the polished table, perfectly composed and clearly not under duress. "Mom, what are you doing here?" His eyes darted between Harold and me, calculating rapidly. I thought you were... How did you get here?" "I took a taxi," I said pleasantly, "the same way I've been getting around for 50 years. Did you forget that I'm still perfectly capable of independent travel?" Harold cleared his throat, drawing David's attention to the thick folder spread across the table. "Your mother asked me to schedule this meeting so she could explain her recent decisions directly to you. Eleanor, would you like to begin?" David's face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan. He sank into the chair across from me, his lawyer's instincts finally kicking in. "What decisions? Mom, if someone's been pressuring you—" "The only pressure I felt recently," I interrupted, "came from my son when he informed me I was a burden on his life. That was quite motivating, actually." I reached for the first document in Harold's folder, my hand steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. "This is my revised will, David. I thought you should know about the changes before they become relevant." The blood drained from his face as he realized what was happening. "You can't be serious. You're not thinking clearly. The stress of the move, the medication." "I'm not on any medication," I said calmly. "Dr. Martinez confirmed yesterday that I'm in excellent health for my age. Sharp as a tack were his exact words. Harold, would you mind reading the pertinent sections?" Harold adjusted his reading glasses, his voice taking on the formal tone of legal proceedings. "The estate of Eleanor Catherine Morrison, valued at approximately $3.2 million, is hereby bequeathed as follows. To the Sunset Manor Nursing Home, $2 million for the establishment of a fund to provide dignified care for residents whose families have abandoned them." David's chair scraped against the floor as he leaned forward. $2 million? Mom, that's insane. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking," I replied, "more clearly than I have in months." "Continue, Harold." To the American Cancer Society, $500,000 in memory of Eleanor's late husband, James Morrison. To St. Mary's Children's Hospital, $500,000 to establish the Eleanor Morrison Pediatric Wing. The silence in the room was deafening. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his legal mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Finally, he found his voice. "That's $3 million? "What about me? What about your son?" Harold looked at me, waiting for permission to continue. I nodded. To David James Morrison, Eleanor's son, the sum of $100, along with this message. I raised you to be a man of character and compassion. Since you've chosen to treat your mother as a burden rather than a blessing, I've decided to redistribute my life's work to organizations that understand the value of caring for others." David shot to his feet, his chair crashing backward. "You can't do this! I'm your son! I'm your only child!" "Yes," I said quietly, "you are. And that makes this even more disappointing." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of legal arguments, emotional outbursts, and desperate bargaining. David threatened to contest the will, to have me declared incompetent, to fight every decision I'd made. But Harold had done his job well. Every document was ironclad, every decision backed by medical evaluations and witness statements. The competency evaluation was conducted by Dr. Patricia Williams, a neuropsychologist with 30 years' experience, Harold explained patiently. Eleanor scored in the 95th percentile for cognitive function in her age group. Any attempt to challenge her mental capacity would be frivolous and expensive. David's final card was emotion. "Mom, please, I love you. I was just trying to do what's best for you. The nursing home has professional staff, medical care around the clock. It also has visiting hours," I interrupted. "You haven't visited once in 3 days. Not once, David. I've been living in that place for 72 hours, and my own son couldn't spare 30 minutes to see how I was adjusting." The truth hit him like a physical blow. He slumped back into his chair, the fight draining out of him as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. "I was going to visit this weekend. I've been busy with the Patterson case." "There's always a case," I said sadly. "Always something more important than your mother." David's silence stretched for nearly a full minute before he found his voice again. When he spoke, it was with the careful tone of a man who just realized he was drowning. "Mom, I know I've made mistakes, but changing your will out of anger isn't the answer. We can work this out. I can bring you home, hire private care." "Can you?" I asked, studying his face for any sign of genuine remorse. "2 weeks ago, you told me that having me in your house was disrupting your family's routine. You said Jennifer needed her space, that the kids were complaining about sharing their bathroom with Grandma." David's jaw tightened at the mention of his wife. Jennifer had never liked me, not from the day David brought her home during his 2nd year of law school. She'd seen me as competition for his attention, a relic from his past that didn't fit into the upscale lifestyle she'd planned for them. "Jennifer was just stressed," he said weakly. The kids had been acting up, and with her book club hosting responsibilities. "Her book club," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. My displacement from my son's home was less important than her book club hosting responsibilities? Harold shuffled through another set of papers, his expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor, there's one more document David should be aware of. The power of attorney revocation." David's head snapped up. "What?" "I've revoked your power of attorney," I said simply. "As of yesterday, you no longer have any legal authority over my affairs. Harold has been appointed as my new attorney-in-fact, with specific instructions about my care and finances." The color drained from David's face as the implications sank in. "You can't manage your own affairs. You said so yourself. The bills were getting confusing, the insurance forms were too complicated." "I said the Medicare paperwork was tedious," I corrected. "There's a difference between finding something tedious and being incapable of handling it. You chose to interpret my complaints as incompetence because it suited your purposes." Harold leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "David, your mother has been managing her finances independently for the past 3 days. She's paid all her bills, organized her insurance claims, and even renegotiated her cable package to save $40 a month. Her cognitive abilities are clearly intact." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he'd been caught in a lie. "This is about money. It's always been about money with you, hasn't it? You think I only care about your inheritance? Don't you?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. David's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Harold, then at me, then at the legal documents scattered across the table. Finally, he spoke. "Of course I care about the money. Do you know how much Jennifer's medical bills cost when she had her surgery? Do you know what private school tuition runs these days? I've got a mortgage on a house I can barely afford because Jennifer insisted we needed to live in the right neighborhood for the kids' future." "So you decided to secure your financial future by warehousing your mother in a nursing home?" I said, my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "Tell me, David, what were you planning to do with my inheritance?" His silence was answer enough.
"There's a new deck you wanted to build," I continued. "Jennifer mentioned it during Sunday dinner last month. Cost estimate of $50,000. And she's been talking about that kitchen renovation for 2 years, another $80,000, if I remember correctly." David's face reddened. "Those are improvements to our home, investments in our family's future. While your mother lives in a place that smells like industrial cleaner and defeat," I said. "How exactly does that benefit the family?" Harold cleared his throat diplomatically.
Perhaps we should discuss the practical implications of Eleanor's new arrangements. David, you should know that your mother has also established a trust fund for her grandchildren's education. David's head shot up, hope flickering in his eyes. A trust fund? $200,000, I said, to be released directly to Michael and Sarah when they turn 18, for college expenses only. The funds cannot be accessed by their parents under any circumstances. $200,000, David repeated, his lawyer's mind already calculating. That's generous, Mom. Really generous. It's also conditional, Harold added smoothly. The trust fund is only activated if Eleanor's grandchildren maintain a relationship with her. Regular visits, phone calls, birthday cards, the normal interactions between grandparents and grandchildren. I watched David's face as the implications sank in. His children, my grandchildren, would only benefit from my generosity if they continued to treat me as family rather than as an obligation. It was a test of his parenting as much as their character. "They love you," David said quietly. "Michael asks about you every day. Sarah's been writing you letters." "Letters I haven't received," I pointed out, "because you haven't brought them to visit their grandmother in the nursing home you placed her in." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. In his eagerness to solve his mother problem, he'd also created a grandmother problem for his children. Michael and Sarah had been asking to visit me, but David had been too busy or too guilty to arrange it. "I can bring them this weekend," he said, his voice small. "They'd love to see you. Sarah's been working on a school project about family history. She wants to interview you about what life was like when you were her age." For the first time since entering Harold's office, I felt a crack in my resolve. My grandchildren were innocent victims in this family drama, caught between their father's selfish decisions and their grandmother's justified anger. "The trust fund isn't a punishment for them," I said gently. "It's a protection. I want to ensure they have opportunities regardless of their parents' financial decisions." David winced at the implication. "Mom, I know I've screwed up, but I'm still your son. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything," I replied. "That's why this hurts so much." Harold gathered the documents, his movements careful and deliberate. "Eleanor, you have time to consider these decisions. Nothing is final until you decide it is." "The will is signed and witnessed," I said. "But you're right. I do have time to see if my son learned anything from today's conversation." David looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that actions have consequences," I said, rising from my chair. "And sometimes, if we're very lucky, people learn from their mistakes before those consequences become permanent." The ride back to Sunset Manor was quieter than I'd expected. David had offered to drive me, his expensive sedan idling in Harold's parking lot like a peace offering. It accepted, curious to see if our confrontation had changed anything beyond his awareness of my legal maneuvering. "The kids really have been asking about you," he said as we pulled into traffic. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles white against the leather. "Sarah cried when I told her you'd moved to the nursing home. She said it wasn't fair that Grandma had to live with strangers." "Out of the mouths of babes," I murmured, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by the window. These were the streets I'd driven David through when he was Sarah's age, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the town's history. Now they felt like foreign territory, viewed from the passenger seat of my son's guilt. "She's right, you know," David continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't fair. I told myself I was protecting you, making sure you had professional care and medical supervision, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from the inconvenience of having you in my house. The admission hung between us like a confession in a church pew. I'd waited 3 days to hear those words, but now that they'd arrived, I felt more sadness. "Why, David?" I asked. "What happened to the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them roses? When did I become such a burden that you couldn't stand having me around?" He was quiet for several blocks, navigating the afternoon traffic with the automatic precision of someone who'd driven these roads for years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of accumulated shame. "It wasn't sudden," he said. "It was gradual, like watching someone age. Every day you lived with us, I saw a little more of Dad in you. The way you'd repeat stories, how you'd forget where you put your reading glasses, the way you'd shuffle in your slippers in the morning. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. I reminded you of your father's decline." "Dad was so strong," David said, his voice breaking slightly. "He could fix anything, solve any problem. But at the end, he couldn't even remember my name some days. Watching him disappear piece by piece was the hardest thing I've ever done." The memory of my husband's final months settled over us like a shroud. James had fought Alzheimer's with the same determination he'd brought to everything else, but the disease had been relentless. I'd cared for him at home until the very end, despite David's suggestions that we consider professional facilities. "I'm not your father," I said quietly. "I don't have Alzheimer's. I don't have dementia. I'm just getting older. And sometimes I'm forgetful or need help with things that used to be easy." "I know that," David said. "Intellectually, I know that. But emotionally, I couldn't separate the two. Every time you asked me to repeat something or needed help with technology, I saw Dad's confusion." I was terrified that I'd have to watch you disappear the same way. We'd reached the nursing home parking lot, but David made no move to turn off the engine. Instead, he sat staring at the building that had become my temporary home, his face reflecting the kind of pain that comes from recognizing your own cowardice. "So you decided to get rid of me before that could happen," I said, understanding finally dawning. "You put me here to protect yourself from the possibility of watching me decline." "I thought it would be easier," he admitted. "I thought if you were somewhere with professional care, I could visit when I was emotionally ready. I could be the good son who came to check on his mother, without having to face the daily reality of your aging." The parking lot was busy with the afternoon shift change. Nurses and aides hurried between their cars and the building, their scrubs bright against the gray October sky. These were the professionals David had trusted with my care, strangers who were paid to provide the compassion he couldn't manage. "But you never visited," I pointed out, "not once in 3 days." "Because I'm a coward," David said simply. "I was afraid to face what I'd done, afraid to see if you were happy or miserable, afraid to confront the possibility that I'd made a terrible mistake." I studied my son's profile, seeing echoes of the man his father had been alongside the flaws that were uniquely his own. James had faced his illness with courage, accepting help when he needed it, and maintaining his dignity even as his mind betrayed him. David had inherited his father's intelligence, but not his grace under pressure. "The worst part," David continued, "is that Jennifer was right. She said I was being selfish, that I was using your age as an excuse to avoid dealing with my own fears about mortality. She said I was punishing you for reminding me that I won't be young forever." This revelation surprised me more than anything else that had happened today. Jennifer, who'd always seemed to view me as an inconvenience, had actually defended me to her husband. "Jennifer said that?" "She was furious with me," David said. "She said that watching me abandon my mother made her question what kind of man she'd married. She asked what would happen when she got old. Would I warehouse her in a nursing home too?" The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter-in-law I'd always considered selfish had shown more moral clarity than my own son. "She's been calling you?" David continued. asking when I'm going to visit you, when I'm going to bring the kids to see their grandmother. She said if I didn't fix this, she'd take the kids to visit you herself. That would be a first, I said dryly. Jennifer voluntarily spending time with her mother-in-law. She likes you more than you think, David said. She just felt like she had to compete with you for my attention. She said she was tired of feeling like the wicked stepmother in her own home. The pieces of our family dynamic were rearranging themselves in my mind like a jigsaw puzzle finally coming together. Jennifer's coolness hadn't been dislike, it had been insecurity. She'd felt threatened by my relationship with David, not understanding that a man could love his mother and his wife without one relationship diminishing the other. I need to ask you something, David said, finally turning off the engine. Are you willing to consider coming home? Not to my house, I know that trust is broken, but maybe we could find you a place nearby, somewhere you'd have independence but I could still help when you need it. The offer hung in the air between us, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to go back to the illusion that my son was the caring, devoted man I'd raised him to be. But another part, the part that had spent 3 days learning to navigate life without depending on him, wasn't ready to trust that easily. I need to think about it, I said finally. I need to see if you mean what you're saying or if you're just scared about losing your inheritance. David's face flushed. I deserve that. I deserve all of it. But Mom, I want you to know, even if you never change your will, even if I never see a penny of your money, I want to make this right. I want to be the son you raised me to be. Then prove it, I said, gathering my purse and preparing to leave his car. Actions, not words. Show me that you remember how to be a son before you worry about being an heir. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my room at Sunset Manor. I was sitting by the window, working on a crossword puzzle while Agnes dozed in her chair, when a soft knock interrupted the quiet rhythm of our Thursday routine. Mrs. Morrison? The voice was young, uncertain. May I come in? I looked up to see a woman in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her hands clutching a small bouquet of flowers. It took me a moment to recognize her. Jennifer looked different without her usual armor of designer clothes and carefully applied makeup. Jennifer, I set down my puzzle, genuinely surprised. What are you doing here? I came to apologize, she said, hovering in the doorway like she wasn't sure she'd be welcome. And to bring you these. She held up the flowers, simple daisies and carnations, nothing expensive or elaborate. I know you like daisies. I remember you mentioning that they were your mother's favorite. I gestured for her to come in, watching as she glanced around the small room with barely concealed horror. Her eyes took in the institutional furniture, the shared bathroom, the narrow beds with their thin coverlets. For a woman who'd spent the last 15 years surrounding herself with luxury, this had to be quite a shock. They're beautiful, I said, accepting the flowers. Thank you. Agnes, wake up. We have company. Agnes stirred, her eyes opening slowly before focusing on our visitor. Well, well, she said, her voice carrying a note of interest. The daughter-in-law finally shows up. Better late than never, I suppose. Jennifer's cheeks reddened, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she pulled the room's single chair closer to my bed and sat down. I know I should have come sooner. I know I should have done a lot of things differently. Such as, I asked, genuinely curious about what had prompted this unexpected visit. Such as standing up to my husband when he started talking about putting you in a nursing home, Jennifer said, her voice growing stronger. Such as telling him that a man who abandons his mother isn't the kind of man I want raising my children. Agnes made a sound that might have been approval. This one's got more backbone than I gave her credit for, she said to me. Most daughter-in-laws would have been happy to see the mother-in-law gone. I was, at first, Jennifer admitted, surprising me with her honesty. When David first suggested it, I was relieved. I thought it would make our lives easier, more peaceful. But then I watched him afterward, and I realized what he'd really done.
What did you realize? I asked. That he'd turned into someone I didn't recognize, Jennifer said. The David I married would never have abandoned his mother. He was kind, thoughtful, always putting family first. But somewhere along the way, he'd become someone who could drop off his mother at a nursing home and then go home to complain about the traffic. She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. The night you were admitted here, he came home and acted like it was any other day. He asked what was for dinner, helped the kids with their homework, watched TV. When I asked him how you were adjusting, he said you were fine and changed the subject. That must have been difficult for you, I said, beginning to understand the complexity of her position. It was terrifying, Jennifer said. I looked at him and thought, this is the man who's supposed to love me when I'm old and sick? This is the father who's teaching my children how to treat family? I realized I'd married a stranger. Agnes leaned forward, her oxygen tank hissing softly. So what did you do about it? I gave him an ultimatum, Jennifer said simply. I told him that if he didn't fix things with you, I'd take the kids and leave. I said I wouldn't raise my children to think that abandoning elderly parents was acceptable behavior. The admission hung in the air between us. I'd never imagined that Jennifer would threaten to leave David over his treatment of me. For 15 years, I'd assumed she saw me as an obstacle to her perfect life. You were willing to leave your husband over me? I asked. I was willing to leave my husband over what he'd become, Jennifer corrected. The man who could abandon his mother so callously wasn't someone I wanted in my life or my children's lives. And what did David say when you gave him this ultimatum? He said I was being dramatic, Jennifer replied.
He said you were getting excellent care and that I was overreacting. He accused me of caring more about appearances than practicality. But you came here anyway, I observed. I came here because I needed to see for myself, Jennifer said. I needed to understand what my husband had done, and I needed to apologize for my part in it. Your part? Jennifer's voice grew quiet. I made you feel unwelcome in our home. I complained about the inconvenience, about sharing the house with another adult. I made it clear that I wanted my space, my privacy, my routines undisturbed. I gave David the ammunition he needed to justify putting you here. The honesty was startling. I'd expected defensiveness, justification, maybe even anger. Instead, I was seeing a woman who'd been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself and her marriage. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want to make it right, Jennifer said. Because I want my children to know their grandmother. Because I want to be married to the man I fell in love with, not the man he's become.
Agnes spoke up from her chair. And what if she doesn't forgive you? What if she decides to keep her money and let your husband stew in his own juices?
Jennifer looked directly at me, her eyes clear and steady. Then that's her choice, and she has every right to make it. I'm not here to beg for money or inheritance. I'm here to beg for forgiveness. From me? I asked. From you, from David, from myself, Jennifer said. I let fear and selfishness drive my decisions. I was so worried about protecting my perfect life that I forgot what actually made life worth living. The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of Agnes's oxygen concentrator. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the nursing home's daily routine, meal carts rattling down hallways, televisions murmuring behind closed doors, the occasional call for assistance. The children miss you, Jennifer said finally. Sarah cries every night, asking when Grandma's coming home. Michael has been unusually quiet, which worries me more than if he were acting out. They don't understand why their father won't take them to visit you. And what do you tell them? I asked. I tell them that Daddy made a mistake, and that grown-ups sometimes need time to fix their mistakes, Jennifer said. But I also told them that this weekend I'm bringing them to see you whether David likes it or not.
Agnes chuckled approvingly. I like this girl more every minute. Takes guts to stand up to a lawyer husband.
David doesn't know I'm here, Jennifer continued. He thinks I'm at my book club meeting. But I needed to see you first to understand what you've been going through before I bring the children." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. But all I saw was genuine remorse and a mother's determination to do right by her children. "What do you want from me, Jennifer?" "I want to know what it would take for you to consider coming home," she said. "Not to our house, I understand that bridge is burned, but maybe we could help you find a place nearby, somewhere you'd feel comfortable and independent." "David made the same offer yesterday," I said. "I know. He told me about the meeting with your lawyer." Jennifer's expression grew serious. "He also told me about the will, about how you've left everything to charity." "And how do you feel about that?" I asked, curious about her reaction to losing the inheritance she'd probably been counting on. "Relieved," Jennifer said, surprising me again. "Terrified for our financial future, but relieved." "Relieved? Because it means you're not the helpless, confused old woman David convinced himself you were," Jennifer explained. "It means you're still the sharp, strong woman who raised him to be better than he's been acting. And it means there's still a chance to fix this mess before it's too late." Agnes leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "So, what's your plan, daughter-in-law? How do you propose to fix 15 years of family drama?" "I don't know," Jennifer admitted. "I'm hoping Mrs. Morrison will help me figure that out." The vulnerability in her voice was genuine. This wasn't the polished, confident woman who'd hosted dinner parties and managed social calendars. This was a mother and wife who'd realized that her carefully constructed life was built on a foundation of selfishness and was now trying to rebuild it with something more substantial. "Call me Eleanor," I said quietly. "We're family, after all." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Eleanor, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "I'm still deciding whether your husband deserves a second chance, but I'm willing to listen to what you have in mind." 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, watching through the window as David helped Michael with his science project in the courtyard below. The assisted living facility Jennifer had found wasn't what any of us had expected when we started this journey toward reconciliation, but it had turned out to be exactly what I needed. The Willows offered independence with a safety net, my own apartment, my own schedule, but medical staff on site and a community of people my age who understood the challenges of growing older without surrendering dignity. More importantly, it was only 10 minutes from David and Jennifer's house, close enough for regular visits but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. "Grandma!" Sarah's voice rang out from the hallway as she burst through my front door, her arms full of art supplies. "I brought everything for our craft project." At 14, Sarah had inherited her father's intensity but her grandmother's creativity. Every Saturday, she came to my apartment to work on various artistic endeavors while we talked about life, school, and the sometimes confusing world of teenage relationships. "Shoes off," I called, smiling as I heard her obediently kicking off her sneakers by the door. "And wash your hands before you touch my good scissors." David appeared in my doorway a few minutes later, his hair slightly windblown from the October breeze. The past 3 months had aged him in some ways. There were new lines around his eyes, a gravity to his expression that hadn't been there before. But he also seemed lighter somehow, as if the weight of his guilt had been partially lifted. "Michael's volcano is ready for the baking soda," he reported. "Fair warning, he's planning to make it erupt at least 6 times. "Good thing we're doing this outside," I said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "How are things at work?" "Busy," David said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But I'm trying to keep better boundaries. No weekend calls unless it's a genuine emergency." This was progress. For the first month after our confrontation in Harold's office, David had been almost manic in his attempts to prove his devotion, calling daily, visiting constantly, showering me with gifts and attention. It had taken several frank conversations to help him understand that I didn't need grand gestures. I needed consistency, reliability, and the simple acknowledgement that I was still a valuable part of his life. Jennifer mentioned that you've been seeing Dr. Phillips, I said carefully. We'd learned to approach the subject of David's therapy delicately. He was still defensive about needing help processing his fears about aging and loss. Twice a week, David confirmed. It's helping. Dr. Phillips says my reaction to your aging was really about my unresolved grief over Dad's death. What do you think? I asked. David considered the question, stirring his coffee slowly. I think I spent so much energy trying not to become Dad, weak, confused, dependent, that I forgot the most important thing about him. Which was? He faced his illness with dignity, David said quietly. Even when he couldn't remember my name, he never stopped being kind. He never stopped saying please and thank you to his caregivers. He never stopped trying to protect you from the worst of it. The memory of my husband's final months had been a source of pain for both of us, but we were finally learning to find comfort in remembering his grace under impossible circumstances. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming, I said. He'd also be proud of the father you are to Michael and Sarah. I hope so, David said. I'm trying to teach them what you taught me, that family takes care of family, even when it's hard. Through the window, we watched as Michael's volcano finally erupted, sending a fountain of foam cascading across the courtyard. His delighted laughter echoed off the building walls, joined by the cheers of several other residents who'd gathered to watch the show. About the will, David said suddenly, his voice carefully casual. Harold mentioned that you might be reconsidering some of the provisions. I'd been expecting this conversation. Over the past month, as our relationship slowly healed, both David and Jennifer had begun dropping subtle hints about my estate planning. They were trying to be respectful, but the practical realities of their financial situation weren't going away. I've made some adjustments, I said, but not the ones you're probably hoping for. David's face fell slightly, but he nodded. I understand. I know I have to earn back your trust. The new will leaves the house to you and Jennifer, I said, watching his expression carefully, along with enough money to pay off your mortgage and handle any immediate financial pressures. David's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. Mom, you don't have to. I also established a larger education fund for the children, I continued, enough to cover college and graduate school if they choose to pursue it. That's incredibly generous, David said, his voice thick with emotion. But what about you? What about your care as you get older? The rest goes to charity, as planned, I said. But I've kept enough to ensure I can age comfortably here at the Willows or wherever else I choose to live. And if you need more care later, expensive medical treatment, then my family will help me figure it out, I said simply, the way families are supposed to. David set down his coffee mug and moved to the window, his shoulders shaking slightly. I'd seen him cry only a handful of times in his adult life, at his father's funeral, when each of his children were born, and now. I don't deserve this, he said finally. Probably not, I agreed. But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to believe that people can change, can grow, can become better than they were. I love you, Mom, David said, turning back to face me. I know I did a terrible job of showing it, but I do love you. I know, I said. I never doubted that you loved me. I just doubted whether you knew how to show it. Sarah emerged from the bedroom where she'd been working on her latest masterpiece, a painted portrait of our family that included Agnes, whom she'd adopted as an honorary great-aunt. Look, Grandma, I made us all together at Thanksgiving dinner. The painting was charmingly imperfect, with slightly lopsided faces and furniture that defied perspective. But it captured something essential about what we'd all learned over the past few months. That family isn't a perfect Norman Rockwell painting, but a messy, complicated, beautiful work in progress. It's perfect, I said, meaning it. We'll hang it right here in the kitchen where everyone can see it. As the afternoon wore on, our small apartment filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. Jennifer arrived with groceries for dinner. Her relationship with me transformed from polite tolerance to genuine affection.
Michael bounded upstairs, his clothes stained with volcano debris, but his face glowing with the satisfaction of scientific success. We cooked together, ate together, cleaned up together.
It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I first moved in with David and Jennifer 9 months ago, but it was something better. A life built on honesty, forgiveness, and the hard-won understanding that love requires both vulnerability and courage. As they prepared to leave that evening, David lingered in my doorway. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me a chance to learn how to be your son again." "Thank you," I replied, "for remembering that being my son was something worth learning." After they left, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea, looking out at the courtyard where families often gathered on weekend evenings. Agnes had been right that first day at Sunset Manor. I wasn't going down without a fight. But what I discovered was that sometimes the best fight isn't about winning or losing. Sometimes it's about refusing to give up on the people you love, even when they've temporarily given up on themselves. The will in Harold's safe reflected my new understanding of what legacy really means. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about the values you pass down, the relationships you nurture, and the second chances you're brave enough to offer. Some burdens, I'd learned, are actually blessings in disguise. And sometimes, the people who call you a burden are simply afraid of their own.